Hi everyone, I'm Emily Parker, and today I'm going to share my journey from a literature graduate to developing a revolutionary method for teaching English. Before we dive in, if you're interested in learning English in a natural and effective way, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Ready to start this adventure together? Let's begin. Hello, I'm Emily Parker. And I never thought I'd become the kind of teacher who would change how English is taught. But here I am, standing in front of my classroom in Boston, watching as another group of students discovers the joy of learning English in a way that actually makes sense to them. You see, my story isn't your typical, "I always knew I wanted to be a teacher" tale. Growing up in a small town just outside of Boston, I was that kid who always had her nose buried in a book. Literature was my escape, my passion, and eventually, it became my college major at the University of Massachusetts. But teaching? That wasn't even on my radar. I remember sitting in my advanced literature class during my senior year, discussing James Joyce's complex narratives, when my professor said something that would unknowingly shape my future. Language isn't just about words on a page. It's about stories that connect us. At the time, I nodded along, thinking only about literary analysis. Little did I know those words would become the foundation of my teaching philosophy. After graduating with my literature degree, I found myself at a crossroads. My friends were applying for publishing houses and marketing firms, but something felt off about following that path. That's when I saw the ad that would change everything. International Language Center seeking innovative English teachers. No traditional teaching experience required. I almost didn't apply. Who was I to teach English? Sure, I knew the language inside and out, could parse complex sentences in my sleep, and had read more Shakespeare than most people read magazines. But teaching? That was different. Yet something about that word, innovative, caught my eye. They weren't looking for someone to drill grammar rules into students' heads. They wanted something different. My first day as a teacher was, well, let's just say it was a wake-up call. I walked into a classroom full of eager faces from around the world, each person carrying their own dreams and struggles with English. There was Maria from Brazil, whose grammar was perfect, but who barely spoke above a whisper. Alex from South Korea, who could recite every irregular verb, but froze in basic conversations. And Jamal from Saudi Arabia, who had the opposite problem. Fantastic conversational skills, but struggled with writing. That's when it hit me. We were doing this all wrong. These students didn't need another teacher drilling them on the past perfect tense or making them memorize vocabulary lists. They needed someone to help them find their voice in English, to make the language come alive through real experiences and connections. I started experimenting with different approaches, drawing from my background in literature. Instead of traditional lessons, I began weaving stories into everything we did. We'd act out everyday scenarios, create personal narratives, and use popular American TV shows and books as our textbooks. My classroom became a living laboratory of language learning. The transformation was remarkable. Students who had been studying English for years without progress suddenly began to flourish. They weren't just learning English, they were living it. And I was learning too, about teaching, about language acquisition, but most importantly, about how to bridge the gap between knowing a language and truly owning it. As I wrap up another class today, watching my students confidently engage in conversations that would have terrified them months ago, I can't help but smile. That confused literature graduate who stumbled into teaching has found her calling. But more than that, she's discovered something that would change not just her life, but the lives of countless English learners around the world. What I didn't know then was that this was just the beginning. My journey from reluctant teacher to innovative educator would lead me to develop what would later be known as the Living English Method. But that's a story for another chapter. My first semester at the International Language Center taught me more about teaching than any textbook ever could. As I mentioned earlier, my initial experiences showed me that traditional methods weren't working. But what I haven't told you yet is how I actually developed my approach through trial, error, and more than a few moments of doubt. I'll never forget my second week of teaching. I walked into the classroom armed with a meticulously planned lesson about present perfect tense, complete with worksheets and exercises straight from the school's recommended textbook. 20 minutes in, I looked up to see glazed eyes and polite but confused smiles. That's when Carlos, a usually quiet student from Mexico, raised his hand and said something that would change my entire approach. "Teacher, I know all these rules, but when I try to order coffee, I still freeze." His words hit me like a bolt of lightning. Here was a room full of people who could conjugate verbs perfectly on paper but struggled with the simplest real-life interactions. The disconnect was staggering, and it forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. I was perpetuating the very system that had failed so many language learners before. That evening, I sat in my favorite coffee shop near Boston Common, surrounded by notebooks and half-empty cups of coffee, completely reimagining my approach. If my literature background had taught me anything, it was that stories stick with us far longer than rules. But how could I transform dry language lessons into compelling narratives? The answer came from an unexpected source. As I sat there brainstorming, I overheard two international students at the next table struggling to order their drinks. They knew the words they wanted to use, but the confidence wasn't there. Without thinking, I turned around and started a conversation with them, helping them practice their order in a low-pressure environment. By the time they successfully ordered their complicated coffee drinks, they were beaming with pride. This impromptu coffee shop lesson became the foundation of what I started calling real-life English scenarios. The next day, I transformed my classroom into a makeshift cafe. Instead of worksheets, my students practiced real ordering situations. We created menus, role-played different scenarios, and even brought in actual coffee cups to make it feel more authentic. The energy in the room was electric, but not everyone was immediately on board with my unconventional methods. The school administration, while supportive of innovation, had concerns about whether students would learn proper English. Some of my colleagues questioned whether this approach could prepare students for formal language examinations. Even a few students, particularly those from more traditional educational backgrounds, initially struggled with this new way of learning. These challenges forced me to become more systematic in developing what would later become the Living English Method. I started documenting everything: which scenarios worked best, how students progressed, what kinds of cultural misunderstandings needed to be addressed. I began incorporating elements of traditional teaching into my immersive approach, but always with a real-world context. Through this process, I discovered something fascinating. When students learned English through relevant, real-life situations, they not only retained the language better, but also gained confidence more quickly. Take Sarah, a shy student from Japan, who transformed from someone who barely spoke in class to confidently giving directions to tourists in Boston's historic districts, all because we practiced navigation and local history through interactive city tours rather than textbook exercises. As my first semester drew to a close, I had a growing collection of success stories, but also a clearer understanding of the challenges ahead. My students were making progress, yes, but I knew I needed to refine my method further. The real breakthrough was yet to come, and it would involve completely rethinking how we view language learning in the modern world. The evolution of the Living English method wasn't a sudden eureka moment. It was more like putting together a complex puzzle, piece by piece. After that first semester of experimentation, I knew I was onto something, but I needed to transform these scattered techniques into a comprehensive system that could work for any English learner. The breakthrough came when I started thinking about how we naturally learn our first language. No baby learns to speak by memorizing grammar rules or vocabulary lists. Instead, they learn through immersion, context, and most importantly, necessity. This simple observation became the cornerstone of my method. I structured the Living English method around what I call the 4 pillars of natural learning. First, there's contextual immersion. Instead of teaching isolated grammar points, we create situations where students naturally encounter and need to use specific language structures. For example, when teaching past tense, we don't start with conjugation tables. Instead, we begin with storytelling sessions where students share their experiences from the weekend. The grammar emerges naturally from the context. The second pillar is cultural integration. Language and culture are inseparable, so I began incorporating American cultural elements into every lesson. We watch clips from popular TV shows, discuss current events, and explore American customs. I remember when Ming, a student from China, finally understood the phrase piece of cake after we actually baked one in class while discussing American idioms. Personal connection forms the third pillar. Every student brings their own experiences and interests to the classroom, and I learned to harness these as learning tools. When Antonio, an architect from Spain, struggled with technical English, we used his professional knowledge as a foundation. He created presentations about famous buildings, naturally incorporating the vocabulary he needed for his field. The fourth pillar, active application, might be the most crucial. Students don't just learn English, they live it. We transform the classroom into different settings. One day it's a restaurant, another day it's a job interview room. We even take field trips around Boston, turning the city itself into our classroom. But the real magic happens when these pillars work together. Take Maria, whose story I mentioned earlier. She was originally too shy to speak above a whisper. Through contextual immersion, she gained confidence in everyday situations. Cultural integration helped her understand American communication styles. Personal connection allowed her to share her passion for cooking, and active application gave her real-world practice. Within 3 months, Maria was leading cooking demonstrations in English, teaching her classmates how to make traditional Brazilian dishes while naturally using complex language structures she previously struggled with. Her transformation wasn't just about language acquisition, it was about finding her voice in English. The success stories began to multiply. Alex, the Korean student who could recite grammar rules but couldn't hold a conversation, discovered his love for American sports. We used baseball statistics to practice numbers and game recaps to work on past tense narration. Soon, he was confidently discussing MLB rankings with native speakers. Jamal, who struggled with writing, found his rhythm through blogging about his experiences in America. By connecting writing to his real-life observations, the formal aspects of language became tools for expression, rather than obstacles to overcome. As word spread about our unconventional methods, other teachers began asking about my approach. I started hosting workshop sessions, sharing not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind them. The skepticism I'd initially faced from colleagues turned into curiosity and then collaboration. The administration, seeing the impressive results, gave me more freedom to develop the program further. We created a living language lab where students could drop in for immersive practice sessions. We established partnerships with local businesses for internship opportunities, giving students real-world language practice. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect was seeing how the method adapted to different learning styles and needs. Visual learners thrived with our scene-setting activities. Kinesthetic learners excelled in our role-playing exercises. Analytical minds appreciated understanding the cultural reasoning behind language patterns. As I refined the method, I realized we weren't just teaching English. We were helping people find their authentic selves in a new language. The Living English method had become more than a teaching approach. It was a bridge connecting different cultures, experiences, and ways of thinking. Looking back at my early days of traditional teaching, I can hardly believe the transformation. But the journey wasn't over. In fact, the biggest challenges and opportunities were still ahead, as we prepared to take this method beyond the walls of our Boston classroom. While the Living English method was proving successful in our classroom, it was the individual stories of transformation that truly demonstrated its power. I'd like to share 3 particular stories that not only validated our approach, but also helped shape its future development. First, there's the story of Yuki, a software engineer from Tokyo. When she first joined our program, she had what she called perfect textbook English, but would panic during client calls. Her company had sent her to Boston for 3 months, hoping to improve her communication skills. Instead of focusing solely on business English, we worked on building her confidence through real-world scenarios. We set up mock client meetings, but with a twist. They were held in local coffee shops, not sterile classrooms. Other students played different roles, and we even invited native English-speaking tech professionals to join some sessions. Within weeks, Yuki's transformation was remarkable. She stopped translating in her head and started thinking in English. By the end of her stay, she was confidently leading technical discussions. Her company later reported that she had become their go-to person for international client communications. Then there's Miguel's story, which still brings tears to my eyes. A talented chef from Mexico, Miguel had been working in Boston restaurant kitchens for years, but had never advanced to a head chef position, despite his exceptional culinary skills. The language barrier kept him confined to prep work, away from customer interaction and team leadership roles. We tailored his learning experience around the restaurant industry. Other students became his kitchen staff and customers. We practiced everything from inventory orders to menu explanations. The breakthrough came when Miguel participated in a local food festival, confidently presenting his dishes to hundreds of attendees in fluent English. Today, he's the executive chef at one of Boston's top restaurants, and he occasionally visits our class to inspire new students. The third story is about Sarah, a Syrian refugee who arrived with her medical degree, but couldn't practice in the U.S. due to language requirements. Traditional ESL classes had left her frustrated. She knew medical terminology but struggled with everyday communication. Through our method, we created a study group specifically for healthcare professionals, combining medical scenarios with daily life situations. Sarah's dedication was incredible. She not only mastered medical English, but also became a bridge between the healthcare system and the local Arabic-speaking community. 6 months after starting our program, she passed her medical English proficiency exams. Today, she's completing her residency at Massachusetts General Hospital while mentoring other international medical professionals in our program. These success stories began attracting attention beyond Boston. Local businesses started reaching out, asking if we could create specialized programs for their international employees. Other language schools requested workshops to learn about our methodology. The Boston Globe even ran a feature story about our innovative approach to language learning. But what touched me most was how our students began creating their own community. They organized language exchange meetups, cultural potlucks, and professional networking events. The classroom had become more than a learning space. It was a launching pad for cross-cultural connections and professional growth. The impact extended into the broader Boston community as well. Our students started volunteering as cultural ambassadors in local schools, sharing their experiences while practicing their English. They participated in community events, bringing international perspectives to local discussions. What began as a language learning program had evolved into a movement for cultural understanding and community building. Recognition from the educational community followed. The Massachusetts Board of Education invited me to present our methodology at their annual conference. Universities began showing interest in incorporating elements of our approach into their ESL programs. But for me, the real validation wasn't in the accolades. It was in seeing our students achieve their dreams, one conversation at a time. As I reflect on these transformations, I realize that the Living English method did more than teach language skills. It helped people reclaim their identities in a new cultural context. Each success story reinforced what I had discovered in those early days. Learning English isn't just about mastering grammar and vocabulary. It's about finding your voice and your place in a new world. The success of our Boston program made one thing clear. We needed to think bigger. While transforming lives one classroom at a time was rewarding, I kept thinking about millions of English learners worldwide who could benefit from our method. The question wasn't whether to expand, but how to maintain the personal touch of our approach in a digital format. The answer came from an unexpected source. During a particularly energetic class discussion, Wei, a tech-savvy student from Shanghai, was recording our role-playing session on his phone. "My friends back home would love this," he said. "They've never seen English taught this way." That casual comment sparked an idea that would change everything. Working with a team of dedicated former students who had become tech entrepreneurs, we began developing a digital platform that would capture the essence of the Living English method. We didn't want to create just another language learning app. We wanted to build a virtual immersion experience. The platform, which we named Living English Digital, launched with 3 key innovations. First, we created interactive virtual environments that mimicked real-world settings, from coffee shops to job interviews. Students could practice conversations with AI-powered characters while receiving instant feedback on their pronunciation and word choice. Second, we incorporated a community feature where learners could connect with others at similar levels for conversation practice. Think of it as a global language exchange program, but with structured guidance based on our proven methodology. Students in Tokyo could practice with peers in São Paulo, creating authentic cross-cultural communication opportunities. Third, we developed what we called story paths, personalized learning journeys that adapted to each student's interests and goals. A business professional would encounter scenarios relevant to their field, while a student preparing for university would practice academic discussions. The system learned from each interaction, adjusting the difficulty and focus areas accordingly. The results exceeded our wildest expectations. Within 6 months of launch, we had users from 47 countries. The platform was particularly successful in regions where access to quality English education was limited. We received messages from students in rural areas who finally had access to immersive language learning. But scaling up brought new challenges. How could we maintain the personal connection that made our in-person methods so effective? We solved this by creating a network of certified living English coaches who conducted regular video sessions with small groups of students. These coaches, many of whom were successful graduates of our Boston program, ensured that the human element remained central to our approach. Cultural adaptation was another hurdle. What worked in Boston didn't necessarily translate directly to other cultures. We worked with local educators and cultural experts to adapt our scenarios and examples while maintaining the core principles of our method. For instance, our business English modules now include specific cultural etiquette for different regions. The platform's success stories began pouring in from around the world. A group of teachers in rural India used our resources to transform their English classes. A small business owner in Chile credited the program with helping her expand her company internationally. A doctor in Egypt finally passed his medical licensing exam after years of struggle. The data we collected proved what we'd known intuitively. Immersive, contextual learning works. Our students showed faster progress compared to traditional methods, with particularly strong improvements in speaking confidence and real-world communication skills. But more importantly, they maintained their progress over time, something that had always been a challenge in language learning. As I sit in my office overlooking Boston Common, watching the seasons change just as I've watched countless students transform over the years, I can't help but reflect on how far we've come, and more importantly, where we're heading. The future of English teaching isn't about choosing between traditional methods and innovative approaches, or between classroom instruction and digital learning. It's about creating seamless experiences that adapt to each learner's needs. Our journey has shown that the most effective learning happens when we break down the artificial barriers between language acquisition and real-life application. I'm often asked what the next revolution in language learning will be. My answer might surprise some. It's not about technology, though technology will certainly play a crucial role. The next revolution will be in how we think about language learning itself. We're moving away from the idea of English as a subject to master, and toward English as a tool for global connection and self-expression. The Living English method continues to evolve. We're currently piloting programs that use virtual reality to create immersive learning environments, allowing students to travel to English-speaking countries and interact with virtual native speakers. We're developing AI systems that can understand not just what learners say, but the cultural context behind their communications, helping them bridge the subtle gaps that often separate language competence from true fluency. But amid all this innovation, our core principle remains unchanged. Learning happens best when it connects to real life and real emotions. Whether it's through a sophisticated VR simulation or a simple conversation over coffee, the key is making the language personally meaningful to each learner. To my fellow teachers and future language educators, I offer this advice: never underestimate the power of authentic connection. The most sophisticated teaching method in the world can't replace the magic that happens when a student suddenly realizes they can express themselves in a new language. Our role isn't just to teach grammar and vocabulary, it's to guide our students on a journey of self-discovery through language. And to English learners everywhere, I want to say this: your journey to English fluency is unique, just like you. Don't let anyone tell you there's only one way to learn. Find the method that resonates with your learning style, your goals, and your life. Remember, every conversation, every mistake, and every small victory is part of your story. As I look to the future, I see a world where language barriers continue to fall. not just through technology, but through human connection and understanding. The Living English method will continue to adapt and grow, but its heart will always remain the same, helping people find their authentic voice in a new language. This isn't the end of our story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. The future of English teaching is being written every day by every teacher who dares to innovate and every student who dares to speak up. And I, for one, can't wait to see what the next page brings. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for more stories in English and lessons. Click the bell icon to be notified when we post new videos. Your support means a lot to us. See you next time.